Okay, resume and CV, let's talk about that a little bit. Just in general, what is the difference between these two documents? They're very similar, actually. And when do you use each one? Is there different places or opportunities where you use each one? For example, a British citizen, a British person would apply with a CV, and an American would use a resume. And an Australian may use both. Or if I live in America, but I'm applying for a job and I'm going to relocate to London, I might need to do a CV. So, even though Americans have used resumes and pretty much exclusively use resumes, now all of a sudden they're like, gosh, now I've got to create a CV. How do I do that? Don't worry, we'll teach you how to do that in the course. So that's come up. So what's the difference and when to use each one? By the way, how an employer reviews your resume or CV is the same. And we're going to get in that section of how they quickly screen through things. What are the key words they're looking for? How do machines review these resumes and CVs? That's coming up. So that's a great section too. So it doesn't matter as we talk about resumes or CVs, they can really be used interchangeably as in terms of how they're being reviewed. A lot of it's more difference as far as what you submit and then formatting. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about CV first, or curriculum vitae. I think I'm saying vitae. If I was in higher education, I'd say curriculum vitae, or something like that. And if I'm wrong on that, please excuse me on that. I use resumes all the time. But CV is what everybody kind of refers to. I don't know if anybody calls it curriculum vitae. Maybe they do. Which means in Latin, course of life. There you go. Now you can share that with your friends or your family and say, I know what a CV stands for. It's course of life. And a CV is basically a very in-depth document. And it's evolved over the years, by the way, too. It's actually the resume and CVs have become very interchangeable over the time. CVs used to be very traditionally laid out, and they still are very traditionally laid out. They typically can be, at best, really like a resume where it's kind of evolved to be more like one page, but a lot of times they're two or more pages. That's still very likely to get to two, and maybe even one is fine, but two is very common, 2 pages. Versus a resume, which typically you want to try to keep to 1 page. You don't have to follow that rule exclusively, but that's an idea behind it. And it contains a high level of detail about your background and your achievements. And it's a little bit more standardized form too. Even the European Union has kind of a standard format you can download and use, for example. So it's a little bit more standardized. It's very organized chronologically, and it's more of a static document too, where resumes you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with. You can even have an infographic resume, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But, curriculum vitae is, they're a little bit more, or supposed to be organized in a more static or standard type way to make it more universally used for people to review. And it typically doesn't change for different positions. That means as far as what you're applying for, when people are looking for, but you want to do that, and it's good if it does, and good that you tailor your CV and parts of that to emphasize things or supporting information that you put, like in a resume, when you're applying to a particular position. And the differences, a lot of times, are covered in a cover letter, where you might send a static CV. Though again, I think it's always good to customize that, but you could send a static CV and then a cover letter. Even if you're uploading it or sending it through email, you'd have a cover letter, and that might go into some unique things about the position you're applying for and why you're applying for that position or why you're a good fit might come into that part. So that's kind of a CV. As we look at a resume, that tends to be a little bit more concise document. It's typically not longer than 1 page. Many people have a long history of work experience or a lot of things to share with skills and education in addition to a work history. And it's not against the law to go to 2 pages or I guess even more. But you start getting more than 2 pages, even more than 1 page, people, they don't look at it closely. Machines might scan it but people aren't looking at it closely. So it's typically 1 page. It's designed for quick and easy review. That's why it's 1 page. It's formatted in a way that's easy to review, quick for a hiring manager, quick for a robot to review it, quick for a recruiter to review it. And the nice thing is, and we're going to talk in great detail of this, is how you can adapt it to a position you're applying for. And every position you're applying for, you can make small adaptations to that particular company, using their words, highlighting certain skills, changing the job title at the top, different things you can do as far as what your summary or information around that, things we're going to be showing. And it doesn't have to be ordered chronologically. It could be, there's different types of formats of resume. It could be organized around skills. When we get to that section, we're going to tell you the best way to do it, which is actually a hybrid of chronological and skill-based, is what's typically used and what really works best. And we'll show you that and why that is. But it doesn't have to be, where CV tends to be more, and really is more, a chronological, follow this formatting type of document typically. And a resume doesn't have to cover your whole career. And it's a very highly customizable document. That's the thing. So anything CVs tend to be a little more standardized, but don't have to be totally. And resumes are customizable, but again, don't have to totally be that way either. So, they're very similar in how how you approach them. So CV is long, or can be long, covers your entire career, and more static, and resume is shorter. No particular format rule, though there's certainly best practices we'll be sharing and can be highly customizable. So that's a little bit of the difference between the two. So when do you use each one? So you think about it, a resume is really the preferred document in US and Canada. That's typically Americans, Canadians might use a CV if they're applying for a job abroad, or certainly you might see CVs more in academic or research-oriented positions where they're looking for that. They use that as far as the norms that come from them. CVs you very much see a lot in Europe and New Zealand. I mentioned that European template. There's different templates. You can just download that. For the Eurozone as a template you can use. There's many templates out there. We'll get into that in a little bit too. And then in Australia, India, and South Africa, a lot of times the terms resume and CV are used interchangeably. And the term resume is more for private sector, and CV might be more commonplace for public sector positions. China, it can really vary. A lot of times that's a resume, but could be a CV. And Japan uses a very specific form of resume. I'll see how I do with this one too. Rakisho, that has very specific formatting to follow, which can be different than maybe a resume as far as having more flexibility. So on a resume, you may or may not use a headshot or a picture, where typically with a Rakisho, they're really requiring a headshot, or that's a yes to that. So understand, as far as where it might vary when you use which one, a resume or a CV. All right, but which one should I use? Well, first off, don't worry about that. They're going to tell you what to upload. They'll say, please upload your resume, or please upload your CV, or please send us this document, and you're going to be fine, especially if you live in that particular country. If you're in the United States, again, other than higher education, research, you're always going to be pretty much using a resume, for example. And if you're, let's say an example, what if I'm applying to an American company that's located in Britain? That seems like a catch-22. Don't worry about it. They're going to tell you what they're looking for on the documentation as far as that would go. So let's now look into, I'm going to give you the inside look here coming up on how I and other hiring managers review a resume. This will be hopefully very interesting to you, because you want to design a resume for people like me who hire people, and there's certain ways to do that to make it much, much, much more effective. And that's what we're going to learn about next.